Does the ultimate and tactical balance of the Codex Astartes still hold true? Let's talk through the Space Marine Gladius Task Force and its place in the new Codex, and with its fairly godly movement tricks and the brutal devastation of the enormous fire discipline combo, is it still one of the best ways to play Codex Space Marines? Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're talking Space Marines once more, and in this video I thought we'd talk about the Gladius Task Force, what it brings to the table, and whether or not it still seems to be one of the very strongest ways to play Space Marines with its powerful abilities. We'll talk through the core combat doctrines rules, then each of the stratagems and their worth in game, take a look at the enhancements and focus on the sheer silliness that you can do with the massive fire discipline combo, brutal damage as for aggressors or hellblasters, talk through a few other units and chapters, and finish up with a couple of army lists. Loads to talk about, so let's jump straight in. The Gladius Task Force will absolutely be a detachment that most people are familiar with these days. It's the one that the Space Marines have had since the launch detachment came out, and in general I think Games Workshop have done a very good job of making it feel like a balanced Space Marine force. There's powerful incentives to use at least some shooting units and some assault units right now, and I feel like out of all the Codex Space Marine detachments, most of the rest of the detachments tend to really focus around having certain units in your army list, and perhaps to the point where they just don't really offer all that much to a fairly balanced Space Marine army, which might be reflective of a lot of people's collections. It's kind of the archetypical detachment of the Ultramarines as well, who are very popular, the poster boys for Warhammer 40k in general pretty much. The primary benefits of the Gladius Task Force are various different move and damage options, and you can flex between them for one command point each. Movement in 40k might not be quite as exciting as just raw massive more damage, but if you're playing on a table with a good amount of terrain, it's going to be absolutely vital getting your units where they need to be, either getting them within charge range or with good lines of sight to destroy the opponent before they do the same to you. From initial impressions and what people are taking to tournaments in the first week or two of the Space Marine Codex being out, it very much seems to be remaining popular as one of the strongest ways to play Space Marines, perhaps alongside the Ironstorm Spearhead if you're skewing to loads of tanks and vehicles. The Death Watch and Black Templars are maybe having a bit more success than standard Space Marines, but for the core of the Codex, Gladius definitely seems to be one of the best ways to play, and as I mentioned, unless you've got a really big Space Marine collection and enough to skew very heavily towards one of the detachments, then it might be that Gladius is your optimal choice. Say for example if you don't have enough transports to make the Firestorm worth it, or enough powerful damage dealing vehicles to really go for the Ironstorm. Getting into the rules for the Gladius though, and its primary rule are the combat doctrines. You choose these in your command phase, and you can activate each one of them once per game, though any given unit can just flex into them for one command point, which means that you've got access to any of these three really quite useful rules for any unit at any time if it's going to be sufficiently worth it. As well as that, each of the doctrines all boost one stratagem each as well, making them significantly more powerful than they would be otherwise. First up, the Devastator Doctrine gives you advance and shoot, really quite a big deal for getting range and line of sight from your units, and I feel like this could be a particularly good one early in the game. Your army can move up and get good positions while not compromising on the firepower that they're putting out, provided you've got at least a few good enemy targets to fire at while your units are getting into position. It could well be worth triggering possibly even turn 1. It can be nice for units that absolutely need to advance, like say if they need to do so to get onto an objective as well and not give up their shooting. It's quite nice for things like impulsors with that as well. It's also pretty good for short range things as well, like eradicators, where the ability to advance and shoot with those 18-inch melter rifles could be the difference of getting that scary damage output on a great target or not. Next up, the other good one I'd say is the Assault Doctrine. This one's advance and charge, a nice glorious boost to push Space Marines towards the enemy and into melee really quite quickly. If you're allowed to do this, then it would increase your unit's threat range as their movement characteristic plus 7 inches to their unit's movement characteristic plus 10.5 inches on average. That really is going to expand how far they can reliably charge enemy units. Maybe quite a handy one to jump into on turn 2 or turn 3 to let one Space Marine unit get into an enemy unit that they might not have otherwise been able to reliably charge. And I feel like to flex into this for one command point is really quite big as well. If it is the difference between a big melee unit getting to the fight or not, then that could be easily worth the command point. Finally, I'd say perhaps the most niche is the Tactical Doctrine, the one that allows you to fall back and still shoot and charge. It is just kind of dependent on your units getting into combat and your opponent not having fallen back and no unit having gotten fully wiped on one side or the other. Probably worth triggering if neither of the others are going to be particularly useful or you've already used them and there's at least one unit that can benefit for good effect though. In some situations it could be really big, say if your opponent's tagged a scary infantry gunline unit with one of theirs and being able to fall back and shoot would genuinely make the difference of a huge amount of damage. Or maybe even a powerful generalist squad like some Terminators or Aggressors is in a protracted combat, being able to fall back, shoot off all of their small arms, and then get the advantage of the charge again could be quite nice. Overall, they're all really good, and I feel like the ability for one command point to flex into any of these for any unit at 1 point per game could be massive. Any of the reasons that we've just talked about could be reason to do so, though you really would have to pick your moments and make sure that you're using it for the absolute game critical moves. Getting into stratagems, and we start out with the standard reliable Armour of Contempt. 1 command points to worsen enemy AP by 1 in the shooting or fight phase. Common to all the Space Marine detachments and generally quite good. Very nice in particular with things with high saves, maybe things like Redemptor Dreadnoughts. Then for 1 command point we've got Honour the Chapter, which I think is quite a nicely usable one. Units melee weapons gain the Lance keyword, so that's +1 to wound on the charge there. And in the Assault Doctrine you actually get an extra AP -1 as well. Given that you're usually going to be triggering the Assault Doctrine when a unit needs to make a big charge, then it's going to often line up. If both of those damage boosts are actually meaningful against the target that you're charging into, then it's very, very nice. Say for example, you could have a bunch of Blade Guard veterans with +1 to wound on their sort of mid-strength power swords and AP -3 rather than AP -2. Both of those are rather big deals, I think. I feel like this one's quite nice as a battle tactic as well, as it's very usable on captains, often leading scary melee units towards the fight. Next up for 1 command point there's Squad Tactics, which is situational but could be amazing in the right situation. You can opt to trigger this when an infantry or mounted unit has an enemy unit end its move within 9 inches of them, and if your unit isn't in engagement range it gets to move d6 inches, boosted up to a big 6 inches if you're already in the Tactical Doctrine, which is definitely more reliable. I think in general the best use of this one are if it's going to make the difference between a powerful unit basically taking no damage or taking loads of damage. If say you've got a shooting unit that's just outside of ruins, this might be enough to jump them just behind a ruin and stop any of the enemy units shooting at them whatsoever. That could be really quite big. Or potentially if you're faced by an oncoming enemy melee unit that's just about to charge you, an extra d6 inch movement backwards might be able to keep you out of charge range and again save your unit's life when they might have died otherwise. I guess occasionally it might make the difference between piling more bodies onto objectives as well, which could swing the balance of some victory points, though I guess that is depending on your opponent not just destroying the squad later on in the turn. Overall though, definitely really quite big in the right circumstances, but not one that you'd likely use every turn. Next up for 1 command point there's Storm of Fire, a shooting buffing one. This one gives you ignore cover to your unit when you're shooting, and if you're in Devastator Doctrine as well, it also gives you an extra pip of AP. Ignore's cover I think is okay. It might be relevant if you're shooting at say a high save enemy vehicle in cover. It could allow them taking a lot more damage there. I feel like in general you are going to need a big powerful shooting unit where the extra cover and hopefully the AP is also relevant against the same target. Otherwise I feel like it's just going to be kind of limited value for 1 CP. I think it perhaps really comes into its own though when it's part of the big fire discipline combo, which might be the strongest use of it, which we'll get onto in a second. Otherwise for 2 CP there's Only in Death. This allows your Space Marines to fight in death, and you have to trigger it when your opponent nominates your unit as a target of their attacks. I'd say this one is good, but just for practical reasons will probably kind of rarely be used. It requires you to have a good melee unit in combat, likely to have been charged by an enemy unit that might well wipe them out this turn, and also for your melee units to be able to meaningfully damage that unit that wipes them out in combat, at the same time as you have 2 CP going spare, and you haven't wound up spending things on say Armour of Contempt to try and keep that unit safe in the first place. Definitely powerful in the right situation though. It could basically give you a sort of double kill on certain enemy units sometimes, which could be really big for 2 CP. In practice though, besides against very dedicated melee armies, I feel like this one's just generally quite rarely used. Finally for 1 CP there's Adaptive Strategy, the one mentioned earlier where you can just have a 1 command point change for any of your squads to pick up any single combat doctrine. As mentioned before, that one's really quite handy just to be able to flex into the different movement options. Kind of a shame it's not a battle tactic for things like captains to use. Overall I feel like the stratagems of the Gladius really are quite powerful. Lots of good flat value and a few situational but powerful things. I'd say it's perhaps really only in Death that's a little bit on the niche side. Otherwise for the Gladius you get the choice of 4 different enhancements, a couple of character buffs and then a couple of squad buffs. The ones to make characters mighty are these two. The Honour Vehement is 15 points. This one gives 1 melee weapon that your character has +1 strength and +1 attack, or going into +2 strength and +2 attacks in the Assault Doctrine. I feel like it's alright as an upgrade, maybe a little bit take or leave. I'd probably be most tempted by it on a captain or Gravis captain with a power fist, gets it all the way up to strength 10 perhaps. I think it's perhaps a reasonable enough sink of points if you've got nothing better to spend them on. The Artificer armor is the next one. This one gives you a 2+ save and a 5+ feel no pain. I think for just 10 points that's fairly respectable on the right character, really quite a big toughness boost for quite cheap. I think it's particularly nice on the Gravis captain, given that he's got that special rule to half damage. Combining that with a 2+ armor and a feel no pain type save just means he'd be remarkably resilient. In general, this one's probably most worth going for on a character that you think is probably going to get killed at some point in the game, as otherwise it's not going to do anything if his entire squad's intact all game long. So it's going to be better used on something that's very aggressive than something defensive, or you could potentially just use it to try and safeguard a key buffing character, I suppose. Otherwise, for the squad buff ones, we've got the Mighty Fire Discipline. This one's 30 points and gives you sustained hits 1 at range for the bearer's led units. A nice simple damage boost there. But the big deal is when you get into the Devastator Doctrine, as that gives you critical hits on a 5+ there. Just with the sustained hits alone, that usually equates to a plus 50% damage boost for the unit that's shooting. Really quite nice on something scary like, say, a Hellblaster squad or Eradicators maybe. Though as we'll see in a second, it gets very silly indeed if you put it on a Lieutenant or an Apothecary Biologist, as that means that when you get critical hits on a 5+, that also works for the lethal hits too, and then you get into very big damage numbers very fast indeed. I'd rate it as basically auto-include if you have a relevant squad and a character to buff it with, the single strongest enhancement in the Detachment. Finally, for 20 points, there's Adept to the Codex. This one's a captain-only one, and it basically gives your unit a once per game tactical doctrine, provided you're not using a different doctrine for your army. For me, I think this one's just perhaps a little bit too niche for 20 points. Sometimes in a game the tactical doctrine might be relevant for the unit in question, sometimes it really might not be relevant whatsoever, particularly if, say, your opponent keeps on falling back from you. So it just maybe feels a bit presumptive to buy it in for 20 points, rather than just have the option of flexing into it for 1 command point, which you could do for any unit anyway and weighed up against other options. I feel like perhaps locking this to a captain as well maybe isn't the best thing in the world. They don't tend to be the best for buffing powerful firepower units, which feels like it might be the best thing for the tactical doctrine to make them a bit more immune to being locked up in combat and having their firepower ruined. Overall, at their current points cost though, I feel like the other 3 are really quite usable. Fire Discipline definitely going to have the biggest impact on the game if played right, and the other 2 are kind of cheap but maybe not enormously exciting character boosts. Pretty reasonable choices if you're looking to fill up a few more points at the end of an army list when you've got some left over. Digging a bit deeper into Fire Discipline, let's talk about the combo that you can do with that. I'd say it's something that most competitive players will be looking to run if they were using Gladius. The aim of this is just to make a ridiculously scary shooting unit, get critical hits on a 5+ from Fire Discipline plus Devastator Doctrine. That gets you sustained hits just literally from the rule itself, and then have either a Lieutenant or the Apothecary Biologist make those critical hits into lethal hits as well. So every 5 or 6 that you roll is just ludicrously good value. Then ideally you want to point the thing at the target that you've got Oath of Moment on, reroll everything that isn't either a 5 or 6, and proceed to drown the opponent under a whole bunch of lethal hits and sustained hits, most units with all this just posing a grave threat to just about anything in the opponent's army. For the best recipients of either the Lieutenant or the Apothecary, I'd say perhaps the Aggressors seem to be the single most popular choice out there. Perhaps might seem a bit unlikely if you haven't seen them in action when on paper, but the sheer amount of volume fire with the Boltstorm gauntlets that they can do is pretty scary, and they can get up to AP too. Otherwise, I feel like Hellblasters are a pretty solid choice as well, and Eradicators are kind of fine, though really quite limited in scope to really busting vehicles and tanks. Beyond this, I'd rate most of the other choices for Codex Space Marines as just not really the best choices versus these 3. You could use it on Intercessors, Stern Guard, or Heavy Intercessors or something, but just maybe seems like a bit of a weird decision to use it on a unit whose damage output is kind of fine but not standout, as opposed to something that's really just truly threatening. Other units like maybe the Devastators and the Desolation Squad just can't get enough very scary weapons in their unit, same with Eliminators, and other units like Devastator Centurions can't get a lethal hits character attached to them. When you've got your Aggressors or maybe Hellblasters or something, then you can add in Devastator Doctrine either from the natural turn of it or for 1 CP, and then potentially Storm of Fire if needed on top of that, allowing you ignore cover and an extra pip of AP, very big for the Aggressors in particular. Then deliver the whole combo there some way to get them within range of a choice target, maybe with a Land Raider or a teleport type mechanic from one of the chapters, or something like a Repulsor. Putting all of that craziness together, here are the aggressors' numbers with the Fire Discipline combo. This one's 6 Bolt Storm aggressors and Apothecary Biologists with Fire Discipline, 305 points in total. Stack those stratagems and Oath of Moments, and that gives you roughly 40 shots on average, more if you've got Blast from the Fragstorm grenade launchers, or hitting at Strength 4, AP 2 and Damage 1, ignoring cover if they can target the closest unit. Reroll all hits for the sustained and lethal hits on a 5+, plus plenty of the Bolt Storm gauntlets get twin linked as well. And he spit out some pretty crazy numbers versus just about anything else in the game. 44 dead Horde, so that's most Horde units killed in a single round of shooting, 10 Intercessors, 6 Terminators, 20 wounds to a 3+ save vehicle, so most of those are just flat up dead, or 15 wounds to something really tough like a Land Raider or something with a 4+ invulnerable save. As if that weren't enough, aggressors are really quite solid in combat as well with those twin linked power fists, so you could certainly go on to charge if you wanted to. Basically, if you can get these in range on something that's important to your opponent, then you can just tear the heart right out of their army. Between the shooting and then the melee, you could quite easily down things like Imperial Knights in a single shooting and fight phase with these guys. Just for a quick look at the alternative as well, I thought it could be fun to run the numbers on Hellblasters with Fire Discipline. 10 of those are 250 points, so that's slightly more expensive than the other combo overall. And these guys overcharge and get you 20 shots at Strength 8, AP 4 if in Storm of Fire, and Damage 2, all ignoring cover. A lot fewer shots, but at a much more threatening profile. Overall, their comparative numbers are a bit worse against Hordes, though absolutely rinse things like standard Space Marines as you'd expect. Are about the same against Terminators, given the high invulnerable save kind of counters them a bit, but far better against things like a 3+ save vehicle or a Land Raider without an invulnerable save, dropping down to similar sort of numbers to the aggressors if they were shooting at something with an invul. You might get a few shots as well when some of them die to their hazardous rolls, which might well be worth it to be honest if they're going to be spitting out numbers out of these sort of damage outputs again. Between all that, I feel like again they're pretty much another reasonable choice for the option, particularly as they can inflict the damage from a slightly safer range than the aggressors and aren't quite as vulnerable to screening things ruining the damage output a bit, say if the aggressors couldn't have the important target as their closest one. Otherwise, for stronger units for the formation, I guess it's just about anything that would make use of either the combat doctrines in quite a good way, or one or more of the stratagems. I feel like the vast majority of Space Marine units will get some use out of it, perhaps slightly more skewed to things that start on the board and can move around as opposed to coming in from reserve, as I guess quite a lot of the movement stuff just isn't going to be as relevant to them. For the HQs, I feel like captains are a pretty reasonable choice on a Gladius list, given that they've got a fairly strong battle tactic for dealing damage in melee and potentially at range as well. Armour of Contempt's always good to fall back on in the enemy turn though. Perhaps a Gravis Captain with aggressors could be a particularly interesting choice for either the 5+ Feel No Pain or the extra attacks and extra strength enhancements. Lieutenants and the Apothecary Biologists are both really quite nice with the Fire Discipline combo, as we've talked about a lot. It could be kind of helpful for shorter range things like Eradicators being able to advance and deal damage, or perhaps more MIG'd roll units slogging up the board who might like a turn of Devastator Doctrine to get them forward quicker, perhaps a Redemptor Dreadnought to advance and shoot and then get closer to threatened charges later. Units to deliver the Fire Discipline combo could be kind of big. Perhaps things like a Land Raider or Repulsor could be quite nice for that, plus some of the other chapters do have their own specific options as well. And given the existence of that Lance melee stratagem and the advance and charge from the Assault Doctrine, I feel like it's probably worth having at least something that's fairly hard hitting in melee in the army. I feel like you're getting seriously more value than the average formation does out of, say, a squad of Blade Guard, perhaps, being able to threaten a charge at a much greater distance and potentially get +1 to wound when they get there. Otherwise, I'd certainly just back that up with standard good Space Marine things like Scouts, Inceptors, or Infiltrators to do primary and secondary objectives, and usually a fair amount of standard good range damage dealers, like perhaps the Gladiator Lancer, Repulsor Executioner, Storm Speeder Thunderstrikes and things. All of those will quite like the extra lines of sight that Devastator Doctrine might be able to get them as well. For other specific chapters, for delivering Fire Discipline, there's a couple of nice teleport options. Uriel Ventress can grant Deep Strike to one infantry unit on the board, even if it's not the one that he's leading, so you could have a Biologist plus the aggressor's Deep Striking with that, and Blood Angels could potentially teleport a similar combo around the table, either some Hellblasters or aggressors or something teleported across the table by the Librarian Dreadnought's tricks, potentially even on turn 1. Otherwise, certainly over the first few months of 10th edition, Gladius has been kind of shown to beat unique detachments for many of the divergent chapters, at least in tournament win statistics. It seems that both the Dark Angels, Space Wolves and Blood Angels ones all seem to do worse than the Gladius on average. The Dark Angels one has some okay stratagems but maybe questionable core benefits, and it seems that for the Wolves and the Blood Angels, the advance and charge access is actually more valuable than the things that their own unique detachments tend to bring. Extra melee damage from the Blood Angels, or the slightly unreliable but quite good sagas from the Space Wolves. I still say that Gladius is perhaps going to be the strongest way to run Blood Angels. Space Wolves might have a bit more competition for their Thunderwolf heavy list, maybe running the Stormlance perhaps. Otherwise, for Black Templars and Deathwatch, in general since 10th edition has come out, they've tended to stick with their own detachment more so than the Gladius. I think there's nothing wrong with running Gladius as those guys, it does seem to do at least fairly equally well, but the vast majority of players choose to use their own unique detachment and all the benefits that that brings. Finally, just to put that all together, here's just a couple of Gladius Task Force lists that I talked about on the channel earlier in the week. These lists went undefeated at big tournaments the week after the Space Marine Codex dropped, really showcasing the Gladius as one of the strongest ways to play Space Marines. First up, we have this Ultramarines list by Jared Gomez, who used it to take first at Dragon's Lair Open, a big 60-player tournament and going 6-0. It's really quite a fun looking and nicely balanced Gladius list with a little bit of ranged melee and other support options. There's an enormous Death Star type unit in Calgar and 6 Blade Guard. That's a 9 model squad overall and will be very nasty advancing and charging, and also using the Lance melee stratagem for extra oomph. Calgar generates you more command points as well for the other stratagems. There also looks like there's a Primaris Lieutenant in there as well for some lethal hits. The Fire Discipline combo in this one seems to be given to some Hellblasters. There's a Lieutenant with a Power Fist leading a big unit of 10 Hellblasters. As we've seen from their numbers, they'll be able to reduce just about any major threats to a shadow of what it was, potentially killing most things that aren't Titanic scale or don't have enormously high and vulnerable saves. There's then some pretty great objective support. 3 Inceptors dropping down with some plasma. They can drop in the enemy backfield to do some secondaries and kill some heavily armoured things. 2 units of 5 Infiltrators, one of which looks like they're joined by the Phobos Armour Lieutenant for some move shoot move shenanigans in the midfield there. Very nice with their objective denial aura as well. A screening unit of 5 Scouts with heavy bolters. Thriving Cursors that could mark a target for a +1 to hit. Could be nice with the Hellblasters or the Gladiators maybe. And then to round off the list, there's some big punchy vehicles. A Brutalis Dreadnought that would quite like being able to advance and still shoot the multi-melters. 2 Gladiator Lancers for some fairly standard but utterly scary tank killing fire support. And a Whirlwind for some ignores line of sight. Overall feels like really quite a good example of what the Gladius can do. Big fire discipline scariness, and good units that'll make great use of the Doctrines. Finally, here's a second list for the formation as well. This one again I talked about in the video earlier in the week. This one's by Ruben Zhao, who used it to take third at SoCal Open, essentially a Blood Angels force, but only due to the inclusion of a Librarian Dreadnought to teleport some fire discipline aggressors. Everything else is really quite generic Space Marine. Being able to deep strike those aggressors turn 1 will be fairly terrifying. And beyond that, for major threats, there's a Land Raider that looks like it's full of Assault Centurions. Really quite nice to get that amount of danger close into the enemy lines with their Flamers and Hurricane Bolters. There's a unit of Aggressors with a Multi-Melter, which I guess could go in Strategic Reserve or be another thing for the Librarian Dreadnought to teleport. 2 units of 3 Inceptors for some good damage dealing plus secondary action. Some Infiltrators, Incursors, and Scouts for some chaff units to put on midfield objectives perhaps. The Incursors again could be quite nice for getting some big firepower combos going. There's both them and a Stormspeeder Thunderstrike, which could have the Land Raiders las cannons and a Repulsor Executioner with a laser destroyer hitting really quite savagely indeed. The +1 to wound from the Stormspeeder Thunderstrike could be kind of brutal for the aggressors as well. Having the fire discipline combo wounding vehicles on 5s at worst would be kind of nasty. Again, finally there's a Whirlwind for a little bit of pinpoint, ignores line of sight firepower. Again, really quite cool stuff, and again it's nice to see such a nice variation of units being pretty optimal for the Gladius. Plenty of range stuff and a couple of really big melee threats, and there's only one repeated unit in this, which is the Inceptors, and even they have different loadouts. Overall, it does seem that the Gladius Task Force is very much alive and well for the Space Marines. I still expect it to remain one of the strongest ways to play the faction going on. Will be interesting to see if there's more tournament results coming out of this or the Ironstorm Spearhead. Certainly let me know your thoughts on the Gladius in the new era of Marines down in the comments below, and feel free to check out any of my other videos on the various different detachments. I have made one for each one of them in Codex Space Marines now. I'll leave them links down in the video description and as a pinned comment if you'd like to check out a similar review for any of the rest. If you've enjoyed the video, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics, where I'll certainly keep the regular 40k videos coming. I do tend to post new ones just about every day. Finally, if you have been enjoying the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well, and you can find that linked in the video description if you'd like to help support. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things happen next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, an enormous thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.